First Edition is a ministry of First Community Church, a place of worship for everyone, regardless of religious background. Join us to enhance your spiritual journey and share in God's love and grace. And now, First Edition.
Good morning, and welcome to First Edition, the television ministry of First Community Church. My name is Glenn Miles. I'm the senior pastor in this congregation, and on this day we're going to celebrate Easter. Easter is the day when love defeats death, when life continues not only for Jesus, but is given to all of us as a blessed gift. On this day you'll hear the trumpets. You'll see the sanctuary full, the choir loft filled with joyous sounds. And in the sermon, I will proclaim, let it be true. Let it be true that God's love is truly given to the entire world. Let it be true that death does not have the final word, but that love does indeed defeat it. Let it be true that you and I and every person created by the hand of God in this world can find a way to peace, to shalom, to hope. Let this be true. I know you'll be blessed by today's service when we remind ourselves indeed of the great, exciting joy of Resurrection Day. Let it be true. The forgiveness of sin, the grace of God, the resurrection of the dead. On this day, more than any other day, let it be true that indeed life has become the victor over death, that love has defeated fear. Let it be true. Oh, I know there may be some who come with doubts. I share those at times. But on this day, may you find a glimmer of faith, a sliver of hope, maybe even the gift of knowing that you are loved now and forever. There's a story of a well-known intellectual who was also a practicing Christian. He was a professor in a major university in Germany. When he was interviewed by a journalist, the reporter began with a series of questions about his work and his background, and then he said to him, "I'm curious, Professor, as one with a deep intellect, as one who is known for your scholarship, for your brilliant teaching, how is it that you believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ?" The scholar, the professor, he just smiled and said, "Because my mother told me so." It's a cute story, but that's really what we are here to proclaim on this day. We're not here to prove it to you. If you've come for proof, if you've come to find proof that the resurrection is real, you've come to the wrong place. We don't come today with proof. We come with witness. We come with proclamation. We come with stories, the amazing news, the good news, the great news that love has indeed defeated death. Resurrection is not something you prove. You find it, you believe it, you proclaim it. It's like love. If you're loved, you know. If you're at home, you know. When you're finally fully at home. The great writer Anne Lamott tells about a time when she was at literally the end of her rope, when she stumbled into St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in San Anselmo, California. She was addicted to drugs and alcohol. She couldn't write anything. She couldn't do anything. She was stuck, frozen in a terrible and awful place. And when she found her way to that church, they welcomed her in. They treated her as their own. She said, "For the first time in many years, I felt like I was at home." She said that church knew I was at the end of the rope, and they took the rope and they tied a knot in it, and they held onto it, and they held onto me. And she says, home is that place where when you arrive, they have to let you in. That's the place called home. Now I know there may be skeptics and there may be doubts, and some of you maybe are here today only because Grandma said you're coming to church if you want mimosas and brunch later. In fact, we had a discussion about having bottomless mimosas served in the narthex afterwards, but our lawyer said, bad idea. We're glad that everyone was here. But if you've come for proof, again, you've come to the wrong place. Consider the Gospels. All four of them report an empty tomb. But what does that prove? Nothing. There are stories of Jesus appearing to his disciples, to men and to women. There's one story that says Jesus appeared before 500 of his followers. But again, what does that prove? There are more than 500 people here today. That's not that many people when you think of it in the long run. That's a relatively small crowd. If Jesus wanted to prove that he was back, it would have been better for him to travel down to Caesarea Maritima, a long day's ride, down on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, where Pontius Pilate spent most of his days as the governor of Judea. I've been to this place. It is spectacular. You can see the ruins and the remains of what was Pontius Pilate's palace at one time. If Jesus really wanted to show that he was back, why not go and knock on Pilate's door and then in his best Arnold Schwarzenegger voice say, "I'm back." But he does none of that. My friend Scott's a good preacher. He says the point of Christian faith is not for us to experience Christian faith. The point is for our faith to help us encounter the living presence of the holy, the living presence of God. Now, I know for some of us, that's not what we want. We want something else. We want a muscular God. We want a God who's clear about who's in and who's out. We want a God that really is going to come and make some serious demands and get in our faces when necessary. There's a story of a community in the Appalachian Mountains that decided to have an Easter pageant one year. And so they recruited people in the townspeople, to play the various roles of Peter, James, and John, and Judas, and the angry mob on Good Friday as Jesus is being led to the cross, and all the rest. And in fact, the person recruited to be Jesus was the town tough guy. And everyone kind of quietly laughed and snickered. He's going to be Jesus? Can you believe who we chose to be Jesus? Because this tough guy, nobody messed with him. Nobody wanted to get in his way at all. Well, it's time for the pageant. And everything's going well. It's going great. People are acting very well. It's being well received by the crowd that's gathered to watch the pageant. At this particular moment, Jesus is now carrying his cross on his way to the crucifixion. Jesus, the tough guy who's been playing him. And the crowd is really getting into it. The actors in the mob, they're really getting into it. Crucify him! Crucify him! And this one actor really gets into it, and he runs up to Jesus as he's carrying his cross and gets right in his face and says, "Crucify, crucify." And when he does, a little bit of spit hits Jesus, played by the tough guy, in his face. Jesus drops the cross and looks at that guy and says, "I'll see you after the resurrection." I kind of like that Jesus. You know, wouldn't it be nice if that's who he was, if he just kind of came and said, "Here's the clear design and barriers of who's in and who's out, and I'm going to tell you who's in. I'll make these decisions myself." Thank God. Thank God. That is not who came. The story in Luke helps us understand who Jesus is. The women, courageous, faithful, and despite the danger, and yes, there is great danger on this day in Jerusalem, for anyone who is a follower of Jesus may have a cross waiting for them. Certainly that's why the disciples, all of the men are hiding, but the women, faithful, courageous, they step out into the dark of early pre-dawn. They make their way to the tomb. They're there to anoint the body. This was the practice in the ancient Near East. After someone had died, their body would be wrapped in cloths. They'd be placed in a tomb. And then friends and family would come and anoint the body with various spices. This is their friend, their Lord, their rabbi. They can't ignore. Despite the danger, they make their way to the tomb. And what do they find? The story says a man in dazzling clothes. Whatever that means, we don't know. Luke doesn't seem to care. And he proclaims to them, "Did you hear it? He's not here. He's risen." And then later he says to the women, "Remember." And then Luke gives us a key point in his text. And they, the women, remembered Do you hear what Luke is telling us here? These women are more than friends. They are his disciples. They are his followers. They've been listening to his teaching. They've been sitting at his feet, hearing him preach and teach and proclaim the goodness of God's love for all of God's children. And then they remembered. And who are the first preachers on the very first Easter Sunday? Not the disciples, not the men who are hiding. It's the women disciples who encounter this empty tomb, hear this good news. They're the ones who rush out and proclaim the first Easter Sunday sermon. He's risen. It's unbelievable. It's shockingly good news. He's risen. Can we catch up to Luke? 2,000 years ago, Luke made it clear that women and men are equal, not just in church, but in the life of the world. Maybe it's time for all of us, and I'm talking about us in the church beyond, the church universal, to catch up to Luke. It's a beautiful story, but it's a confrontational one. Those are the words of Peter Gomes, who was the chaplain at Harvard for so many years. Easter is confrontational. It confronts us in our living and in our dying. But notice how short that message is, how brief it is. What did the angel say? The man in dazzling clothes might have been an angel. What did he say? He's not here. He's risen. Sometimes the most important messages we receive come with an economy of words. Sometimes life-changing messages are spoken very briefly. I remember in November of 2016 receiving a call from Ginny Barney. She was the chair of the Senior Minister Search Committee at First Community for this church. I picked up the phone and her voice from far away said to me, "Are you willing to accept the call to be the senior minister at First Community Church?" And I said yes. And I promise you, that was 99.5% of the negotiation that went on. It's a beautiful moment in my life. But sometimes, difficult messages are spoken with few words. I want a divorce. We're downsizing now. On December 27th of last year, I received a call from my brother David's fiance. We knew he was dying. When I picked up the phone, all she said was, "He's gone." Easter confronts us with our living and our dying. It asks us to examine our lives now, not only to consider the great, unbelievable gift of life after death, but to ask ourselves to wonder, is there life before death? Are we going to be confronted enough by this message to ask ourselves, are we living right now, in the here and now, fully and completely alive, where we can show that there's life before death? I remember hearing a lecture by the great Dr. Bernie Siegel. He got up and he began this way. He said, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but I've been doing some research, and it turns out everyone dies." He said, "It's true, I'm sorry, but it's true. Joggers, lovers, vegetarians, non-smokers, everyone dies." And the reason I'm telling you this, he said, is so that those of you who get up at 5 a.m. every day to go jogging and eat nothing but vegetables, why not this week give yourself a gift? Sleep late one day and have ice cream for breakfast. I said to there were several young families at the 10 o'clock service, and I said to everyone under 18, you can quote me this week to your mom and dad and say, "Dr. Miles said I can have ice cream for breakfast," because it's true. You see, Easter confronts us in our living and in our dying. George Ross was a good preacher in Akron, Ohio. He said everyone needs somebody in their life who loves them enough to point out the things in their life that are dead, that need to be left so they can move forward and experience life again. Nancy Pittman's a scholar out in Oklahoma in a seminary there. She says something similar. How many persons in the church, how many churches are clinging on to old, dead ideas, thinking that if we can hold them tightly, somehow they'll come back to life. If the church wants new life, if you want new life, maybe it's time to let go of those things so you can find the life that God wants to give you even now, even in this very moment. How many of you are holding on to some past revenge? I'm going to get her someday. I'm going to tell him someday. How many of us have old wounds that we continue to scrape, never allowing them to heal? How many of us are so stuck in the past we can't even imagine moving forward? What is it that does this to us? Again, Peter Gomes, he says it's not sin that unites us. He says we're united in our fear. It's fear that causes us to hold tightly to things that are no longer necessary, to things that are no longer true, to things that are dead. It's fear that causes us to live in a way that looks like we're barely alive. The good news of Easter Sunday is the news that love has defeated fear, that oppression cannot ever be victorious over freedom, that we can finally be set free. But sometimes we live in prisons of our own making. Do you remember the Morgan Freeman character in the movie Shawshank Redemption? Do you remember that? And please, I know it was filmed in Ohio. Every time I use a Shawshank Redemption illustration, I get about 15 emails. Did you know it was filmed? Yes, I know it was filmed in Ohio. Thank you very much. Don't send me a note. When Andy, Morgan Freeman's friend, finds himself in prison, he's sitting next to Morgan. And Morgan Freeman's character says, at first, you'll hate these walls. Then they'll make you crazy. And then you'll get used to them. And then you'll need them. How many of us live in prisons without walls? Find ourselves in jail cells without bars? How many of us are hiding behind fear, afraid to leave and move out into the light of day for whatever might happen to us? The good news of this day is that the resurrection tale is true. Let it be true. Let it be true. Do you know why the Romans killed Jesus? It wasn't because they were afraid of losing their power, or was it? Or was it? Jesus had no army. He had no soldiers. He came only with the truth of his word, of love, of grace, of justice, of forgiveness, of life being given to the entire world, and that caused the mighty Roman Empire to shake and quiver with fear. If that message becomes a part of the people, we'll lose our power. It was fear that caused them to put Jesus on a cross, and it was love that defeated that fear. You know, there's a story about the Freedom Riders. Do you remember the Freedom Riders from the 1960s? Mostly young men and women who rode buses around the cities in the South to confront these various communities with their segregationist laws. Oftentimes, they were met with violence. As often as violence, they were also sometimes incarcerated, wrongly arrested and thrown into jail, maybe for a day or two. But in this particular story, these Freedom Riders were thrown into jail for a couple of weeks. On the first night, they left all the lights on and they played, the guards did, they played blaring music so that the prisoners would lose sleep. The next morning, they woke up to a breakfast that was overly salted, heavily salted, making it unbearable to eat. They were losing sleep. They were hungry. Their morale was falling apart. The guards decided to make it even tougher on them. They took about half of the mattresses away, so that there became envy and jealousy between those who were in prison, those who have mattresses and those who don't. One of the prisoners, one of the Freedom Riders even said, I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so exhausted. I just want to go home. Another heard that voice, and he stood in his cell And he sang through the bars an old spiritual, one that everyone in the prison would know. Soon there was another voice and another and another and another until the entire jail cell was filled with the sound of this spiritual. The jailers came in and demanded to know what's going on. The song ended, and the one who started it looked at them and said, "You can take our mattresses, but you cannot take our souls." The word of Easter is this: the world can take things from you. You can be stripped down to nothing. You can lose everything you have, but that world cannot. That world cannot take your soul, your heart, your mind. On this day, let it be true that freedom and oppression will be defeated. That oppression will be defeated by freedom. I think you get the point. That death will be defeated by love. And that you and I can live in the light of the resurrection, of the unbelievable news, of the amazing news, the shockingly good news. Let it be true. Amen.